Yeah.
The first Saturday in June arrived like a postcard of suburban perfection.
Nice one.
Bleached white clouds
You
drifted
soaked
across
me.
a cerulean sky, and the Ridgemont community pool glistened like a jewel set into the manicured landscape of Maple Ridge Estates. The thermometer mounted outside the fitness center already read 84 degrees at 9 in the morning. Marcus Chin stood in his kitchen, holding a steaming mug of coffee, watching the pool area through the bay window of his new home. Everything about this moment felt surreal. 3 weeks ago, he'd been promoted to project manager at his architecture firm. 2 weeks ago, his marriage had finally ended, amicably enough, thank God, and he'd bought this modest colonial in the suburbs as a fresh start. 1 week ago, at the monthly HOA meeting he'd only attended because the welcome packet suggested it, he'd been elected president by a landslide vote. A landslide, because apparently nobody else wanted the job. He'd protested. He'd raised his hand to nominate someone else. But the outgoing president, a retired orthopedist named Dr. Paulson, had leaned over and whispered, "You seem like a guy who actually cares. We need that." So Marcus had found himself holding a badge, a binder of bylaws, and responsibility for 247 homeowners who would absolutely hate him by August. His phone buzzed. A text from his ex-wife, Sarah, "How's the palace? Are you meeting millionaires yet?" Marcus smiled despite himself. "Living my best life. Pool weather is here." He didn't mention the job nobody wanted him to have. Sarah was finally happy again, something that had been absent from their marriage for 3 years, and he wasn't going to poison that with suburban drama. The pool opened at 10 on Saturdays. Marcus decided to do something he'd never done as a homeowner before, actually use it. He put on his swimming trunks, slathered himself in SPF 50, and walked the 3 blocks through the development to the pool area. The facility was impressive, an Olympic-sized lap pool, a zero-entry leisure pool with a small slide, 2 hot tubs, a cabana with a kitchen, and a weight room visible through the glass walls of the adjacent building. The whole thing was probably worth $2 million. It was also, according to the bylaws he'd been speed reading for the last week, funded by mandatory HOA dues and governed by a set of rules that would make a prison warden blush. The pool area was already busy. A woman with an impressive suntan and a face that had clearly benefited from cosmetic surgery was stretched out on a lounge chair, a drink with an umbrella in her hand. 3 children splashed around in the leisure pool, their nanny sitting nearby, eyes on her phone. An older couple did laps in the main pool. Everything was peaceful. Everything was ruled compliant. Marcus changed in the locker room, locked his belongings in a numbered locker, and emerged into the chlorine-scented afternoon. He was halfway across the deck toward the lap lane when he heard it. "Yo! Brad! Dude, get over here." The voice belonged to a teenage boy, probably 16 or 17, with the physique of someone who spent significant time in the gym and the confidence of someone who'd never been told no. He was wearing expensive swim trunks, designer sunglasses, and an expression of supreme entitlement. Behind him was a smaller boy, maybe 14, scrambling to keep up. "This pool," the older teen announced to his companion, gesturing broadly as if surveying newly conquered territory, "is about to become legendary. We're going to throw parties here. Pool parties. Real ones. Not this sad family stuff." Brad giggled nervously. "Dude, won't that violate some rule?" "My mom's been on the HOA board for 7 years, the first boy said with a dismissive wave. "She told me all the rules are basically suggestions if you know the right people. Plus, her friend on the board, Dr. someone or whatever, basically runs everything. He's not gonna tell on us." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The older boy, his name was probably Brandon or something equally corporate, climbed onto the diving board. He performed an elaborate run-up, and launched himself into a cannonball that displaced enough water to slosh over the edge and onto the deck. "Yes," the boy shouted, erupting from the water. "That's what I'm talking about. This is my pool now." The woman on the lounge chair looked up. She was the one with the excellent tan and the cosmetic surgery smile. She caught her son's eye and gave him a thumbs up before returning to her drink. Marcus dove into the lap lane and spent 40 minutes swimming with an intensity that had little to do with fitness and everything to do with fury. Each stroke was powered by a deep, righteous anger at the entitlement currently holding court in his pool. By the time he emerged from the water, Brandon, yes, it was definitely Brandon, Marcus could hear his mother calling the name, had recruited 4 other teenagers to his cause. They were doing elaborate jumps, throwing a beach ball around, being aggressively loud, and completely indifferent to the fact that several people were trying to actually use the pool for swimming. The older couple had abandoned the lap lane. The nanny was gathering the small children from the leisure pool. Marcus wrapped a towel around his waist and approached the woman on the lounge chair. Up close, he could see her designer handbag, her expensive jewelry, and the particular kind of aggressive friendliness that made his skin crawl. "Hi there," he said, extending a dripping hand. "I'm Marcus Chen. I just moved into the development." The woman sat up, eyes narrowing slightly as she assessed him. "Rebecca Sterling. My husband's in private equity. You must be new, we all basically know each other by now." "I'm sure you do," Marcus said. He let the handshake happen, her grip was surprisingly strong. "Listen, I noticed your son and his friends are having a really great time, but I'm seeing a few things that might actually violate the community pool guidelines. The beach ball, for instance, toys are only allowed in the leisure pool before 10 a.m. and after 5 p.m. during the regular season. And running on the deck is prohibited year-round. And the excessive noise is against the quiet hours protocol." Rebecca's face shifted. The friendly mask didn't disappear entirely, but it cracked enough to reveal the titanium underneath. "Really?" she said, her voice dropping about 10 degrees. "I had no idea you were such a strict rule follower. Are you, like, security or something?" "Actually," Marcus said, and he was immediately sorry he did, "I'm the new HOA president." Rebecca's eyes went absolutely flat. "Oh," she said. Just one word, but it carried the weight of a declaration of war. "Well, isn't that interesting?" "Brandon," she called out, her voice dripping with false cheer. "Brandon, sweetheart, come here for a moment." Brandon came bounding over, water dripping from his expensive swim trunks. Up close, he was even more aggressively handsome in that way that comes from privilege and good genetics, highlighted hair, spray tan, the kind of casual confidence that money cultivates in the young. "This is Marcus Chen," Rebecca said, her smile sharp as broken glass. "He's the new HOA president." Brandon's expression didn't change much, but Marcus caught the subtle shift. The boy was registering information, filing it away, deciding how it would affect his afternoon. "Cool," Brandon said finally. "Well, hey man, we're just having fun. No biggie, right? It's summer." "Actually," Marcus said, "there are guidelines that everyone in the community agrees to follow when they move in. They're pretty reasonable guidelines. They just make sure everyone can use the facilities fairly." "My mom said the rules are more like suggestions," Brandon said, and his tone wasn't disrespectful exactly, it was worse than that. It was completely unconcerned. "Your mom is incorrect," Marcus said flatly. Rebecca made a small, sharp sound. "Well, I don't think we've ever had an HOA president who was quite so hands-on about the pool. Most of them understand that we need to allow for some community flexibility. Some people actually want their families to have fun here." The implication was clear, Marcus didn't want families to have fun. Marcus was a fun killer. Marcus was the kind of person who needed everyone to suffer equally under rules written by boring people for boring purposes. "I want families to have fun," Marcus said quietly. "I also want the single people who live here to be able to swim laps without getting hit in the head by a beach ball. I want the older couples who already spend 8 hours a day being quiet to have one space where they can enjoy their lives. I want your son to understand that there are people around him who aren't his audience." Rebecca stood up from her lounge chair with the kind of dramatic precision that suggested this exact moment was going to become a story she told at parties. "You know what? I was on the board for 7 years, and we never had this kind of atmosphere. We understood that community meant actual community, not just a bunch of rules to enforce against children. Your son is almost an adult, Marcus said. He's physically bigger than I am. He's certainly smart enough to understand that having nice things requires maintenance and respect for shared space. Brad. Brandon called out. Tell him what my mom does for the community. Brad hurried over, still clutching the beach ball. What does she do? I organize the summer volunteer program, Rebecca said. The food drive. I chair the welcoming committee for new residents. So maybe, just maybe, I understand something about community that a person who just moved here might not quite grasp yet. It was a beautiful setup, Marcus had to admit. She'd positioned herself as the soul of community while he became the arbitrary enforcer of rules. She'd created a narrative in the span of 5 minutes. By tonight, probably 10 other people would have heard her version of this conversation, with each telling making him incrementally more villainous. That's genuinely great, Marcus said, and he meant it. And I'm sure those programs are important. But they don't override the pool guidelines. Nobody gets an exemption just because they volunteer elsewhere. That's actually how things fall apart. Well, Rebecca said, lying back down on her lounge chair with theatrical finality, I guess we'll have to see what the rest of the HOA thinks about the new direction we're heading. Brandon, come on. We're going home. Apparently we're not welcome here anymore. She hadn't reprimanded him. She hadn't told him to follow the rules. She'd just implied that Marcus had personally excluded them through unreasonableness. Brandon shrugged at Marcus and jogged off to gather his friends. His mother collected her umbrella drink, her expensive handbag, and her wounded dignity, and led a parade of teenagers out of the pool area. Marcus stood there, dripping and victorious and somehow already aware that he'd made a tactical mistake. Victory, he'd just learned, was meaningless in a situation where the people you defeated didn't actually acknowledge the fight was real. He finished drying off and walked home through the perfect June afternoon, the badge in his pocket suddenly feeling less like an honor and more like an anchor. By 7 p.m., his phone had started buzzing. The first message was from Dr. Paulson, heard you had an encounter with Rebecca Sterling at the pool. Everything okay? The second, 15 minutes later, from someone named Janet Martinez, hi Marcus. Just wanted to check in. Rebecca mentioned you were enforcing some strict pool rules today. Is there something new I should know about? The third, from a man named David Park, hey man, welcome to the neighborhood. Rebecca just texted our group chat about pool issues. What's going on? By 9 p.m., there were 17 messages in the group chat that had apparently been created to discuss what he'd done. None of them mentioned the actual violation of the pool rules. All of them mentioned Rebecca Sterling's character, her decades of service, her close relationship with Dr. Paulson, and, this was implied rather than stated, her potential to make life very difficult for a new president who didn't understand the culture of Ridgemont. Marcus sat in his new kitchen in his new house and realized he'd won a battle and lost the war. Monday morning, Marcus woke up to an email with the subject line, Community Pool, a thoughtful perspective. It was from Rebecca Sterling, and it was a masterclass in manipulation disguised as reasonableness. Marcus. I wanted to reach out to you personally, as I think there may have been some miscommunication on Saturday. I absolutely respect your desire to maintain the guidelines that keep our community functioning smoothly. That's important work, and I'm sure it's not easy to step into a leadership role in an established community like ours. However, I did want to gently point out that Dr. Paulson and I often had conversations about the spirit versus the letter of the rules. While the guidelines certainly exist, they were also meant to be applied with flexibility and common sense. For example, while technically toys aren't allowed during certain hours, the intent of that rule is to maintain safety and order, not to prevent children from having age-appropriate fun. I don't think you're a bad person, Marcus. I think you're new, and you might not yet understand how we do things here at Ridgemont. We're a community that believes in letting people live their lives with a certain amount of freedom and joy. That's what makes us special. I'd love to get coffee with you sometime this week so we can talk more about how we might work together going forward. I have a lot of experience with the bylaws and the community culture, and I'd be happy to mentor you if you're open to that. Best. Rebecca. The email was so perfectly crafted that Marcus had to read it 3 times to understand what was actually happening. Rebecca was positioning herself as his teacher, his guide to the community culture. She was framing his attempt to enforce rules as a misunderstanding of some deeper Ridgemont philosophy. She was offering friendship while making it clear that rejecting that friendship would mark him as unreasonable. It was psychological warfare dressed up in warm language and excellent grammar. Marcus called his ex-wife. Sarah picked up on the second ring, her voice immediately warm in a way it hadn't been for the last 3 years of their marriage. "Hey," she said. "Everything okay?" "I need advice on suburban politics," Marcus said. "Do you have 20 minutes?" "I have an hour," Sarah said. "I'm not going into the office until this afternoon." "What happened?" He told her the whole story, the pool, Brandon, the rules, Rebecca's response, the emails from neighbors, the group chat that had exploded overnight. Sarah listened without interrupting, which was something she'd gotten better at since they'd separated. "Okay," she said when he finished. "So the question is, do you actually care about enforcing the pool rules, or do you care about not causing conflict?" "Both?" Marcus said. "Those are in direct opposition," Sarah said bluntly. "You're going to have to choose one. My guess is that Rebecca has already decided which one you prefer, and she's betting you'll sacrifice the rules to maintain peace." "What would you do?" Marcus asked. "I'd probably apologize, make it seem like I'd overreacted, agree to work more collaboratively, and then I'd very carefully document every single rule violation Brandon commits going forward. And then, when he's committed enough violations to justify real action, I'd enforce it consistently across the entire community so it didn't look personal." Sarah had always been better at strategy than he was. It was one of the reasons they'd worked well together, and one of the reasons they'd eventually failed. Her tactical mind had turned inward on their relationship, always strategizing the next conversation, the next point to make, never just being. "That sounds exhausting," Marcus said. "It is," Sarah said. "But it also sounds like what you actually signed up for when you accepted the job." He thought about Sarah's words for most of Monday, while he worked through a project at the architecture firm, while he ate lunch alone at his desk, while he responded to 4 more friendly but pointed emails from community members. By late afternoon, he'd decided on a version of Sarah's strategy. He wasn't going to give in completely, but he was going to appear to give in completely. He was going to make Rebecca think she'd won. He called Rebecca's number directly. She answered after 3 rings, her voice immediately switching into that warm, helpful frequency. "Marcus. I was hoping you'd call. Did you get my email?" "I did," he said. "And I wanted to apologize." "You're right. I was too rigid with the guidelines on Saturday. I came in hot, and I didn't take into account the culture of the community or the fact that the previous administration had been more flexible with interpretation." There was a pause. He could practically hear Rebecca recalibrating, wondering if this could actually be this easy. "Oh, Marcus," she said finally. "I'm so glad you're being receptive to this. I really did mean that I want to help you. This job is harder than it looks." "I know it is," he said, which was partly a lie. "And I'd really appreciate having someone in the community who could help me understand how things have worked in the past. Would you be free for coffee on Wednesday?" "Wednesday is perfect," Rebecca said. "There's a great place called The Grind downtown, right on 5th Street. Shall we say 2 o'clock? After they hung up, Marcus sat at his desk for a long time, thinking about lies and strategies and the strange way that adult life often felt less like a series of genuine interactions and more like a poker game where everyone pretended the stakes weren't about pride and validation and fundamental disagreements about how to live. Wednesday arrived with gray clouds and the promise of afternoon rain. Marcus drove downtown to the Grind, a coffee shop filled with the kind of carefully curated rusticity that suggested it cost someone a lot of money to make it look like it hadn't cost money. Rebecca was already there, seated at a small table by the window, 2 coffees in front of her. She dressed carefully, expensive casual, the kind of outfit that suggested she had very expensive casual clothes. Her nails were perfect. Her hair was perfect. She was perfect, in the way that suggested perfection was a full-time job she excelled at. "Marcus," she said, standing up to hug him. It was an aggressive hug, the kind that asserted intimacy before intimacy existed. They sat, and Rebecca explained the Ridgemont philosophy to him. It was, she said, a community built on balance. Yes, there were rules, but the rules existed to create a framework, not a straitjacket. Dr. Paulson had understood this. The homeowners had understood this. The community thrived because people understood that neighbors were more important than guidelines. "We're not a prison camp," Rebecca said, sipping her latte. "We're a home. And homes have a different feel than institutions." "That makes sense," Marcus said, and he meant it, in the way that you can mean something while also understanding its fundamentally flawed logic. But homes still need basic rules, or they fall apart, right? Like, you probably have rules in your house for your family. "Of course," Rebecca said. "But I enforce them with love. I don't enforce them because I'm looking for someone to punish." "I'm not looking to punish anyone," Marcus said carefully. "I was just trying to make sure the pool was safe and fair for everyone." "The pool is safe," Rebecca said. "It has lifeguards, and it has safety equipment. What you were enforcing were arbitrary limitations on children's joy." Marcus drank his coffee and said nothing. Arguing was exactly what Rebecca wanted. Arguing meant he was defensive, and defensive meant she could position him as the unreasonable one. "I have a proposal," Rebecca said. "What if you and I work together as a kind of informal team? I know the community culture. You have fresh energy and new ideas. Together, we could really help Ridgemont flourish." What she was actually proposing was that he serve as the figurehead while she retained the real power. It was a brilliant offer, because it also solved a problem he'd genuinely been worried about. He didn't want to be the bad guy. He didn't want to spend the next year enforcing rules against people who didn't think they were rules at all. "I think I'd like that," Marcus said. Rebecca's smile was the smile of someone who has just won a game they invented, played, and scored entirely on their own terms. They talked for another hour about pool schedules and community events and the culture of Ridgemont. Rebecca told him stories about Dr. Paulson, painting a picture of an HOA president who was present but flexible, firm but fair. She made him sound like a saint who had somehow managed to enforce basic order while also allowing for the kind of human chaos that made life interesting. By the time they left the coffee shop, Marcus and Rebecca were colleagues. By the time he drove home, Marcus wasn't sure if he'd made a friend or been infiltrated by a very sophisticated enemy. That night, he got a text from Rebecca, "So glad we connected today. Brandon actually wanted me to tell you he's sorry about the pool incident. He's a good kid. Just spirited. I think you two might actually get along once things settle in. He plays lacrosse for the school, maybe you could come to a game sometime." Marcus stared at the text for a long time. Then he called Sarah. "I think I just made a mistake," he said. "Did you apologize?" Sarah asked. "Yes." "Did you agree to work with her?" "Yes." "Then it wasn't a mistake," Sarah said. "It was a strategic retreat. Now the real game can actually start." But Marcus wasn't sure Sarah was right about that. As he lay in bed that night, listening to the rain begin against the windows of his new house in his new life, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just surrendered to someone far more dangerous than he'd initially understood. The rain continued into Thursday. By Friday, the sun had returned, and the pool area was packed with families enjoying the beginning of the summer season. Marcus kept the badge in his drawer, where it couldn't judge him. July arrived like an unwanted houseguest, bringing with it the kind of heat that made people stupid and petty. The pool became the center of Ridgemont's social universe, families gathering in the evenings, teenagers monopolizing the diving area in the afternoons, the nannies and caregivers forming their own separate ecosystem by the leisure pool. And Brandon Sterling had become exactly what Rebecca had implied he was: spirited. The first real incident happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus was working from home, sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop, when his phone rang. It was the pool manager, a woman named Diane who'd worked there for 12 years and had the exhausted patience of someone who'd seen every possible violation of pool etiquette. "We have a situation," Diane said. "Brandon Sterling and his friends are, I don't even know how to describe it. They're being loud, but that's not technically against the rules. They're jumping off the diving board repeatedly, which is allowed. But they've basically taken over the entire lap lane, and they're throwing things at people who try to use it." "What kind of things?" Marcus asked. "Water balloons," Diane said. "Which aren't technically on the list of prohibited items because nobody thought to put water balloons on the list." Marcus could practically hear Rebecca's voice. "See how the rules have gaps. This is why you need flexibility." "I'll be right there," he said. The pool was in full chaos when Marcus arrived. Brandon and 5 of his friends were engaged in what appeared to be a carefully choreographed water balloon fight, using the lap lane as their staging ground. Children squealed as balloons came flying at them. A woman in a workout suit stood at the edge of the lap lane, looking absolutely furious. An older man had abandoned his laps entirely. "Brandon," Marcus called out. "We need to talk." Brandon turned, water balloon in hand. He had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, which immediately made him seem harmless. "Dude, we're just having fun," Brandon said. "Water balloons aren't against the rules. They become a problem when they prevent other people from using the pool," Marcus said. "They'll just use the other pool," Brandon gestured vaguely at the leisure area. "Come on, man. It's summer. We're kids." "You're 17, Marcus said. "You're old enough to understand that this space is for everyone." "We understand that," one of Brandon's friends said. "We're using it. We're just using it differently than you want." Brandon's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it. His expression shifted very slightly. Then he looked at Marcus with a new awareness, as if he'd just received information that changed the context of their conversation. "My mom texted," Brandon said. "She said I should tell you that she and some of the other board members are talking about whether the entire HOA structure needs some adjustments for next year. She wanted me to tell you that, specifically." It was a threat so perfectly calibrated that Marcus couldn't even be angry at it. He could only admire the audacity, and recognize that Rebecca had absolutely given Brandon permission to say it. "Tell your mother that I appreciate her interest in community governance," Marcus said, "and that I'll look forward to having that conversation when it's appropriate." "She said you'd probably say something like that," Brandon said, tossing the water balloon into the trash. "Come on, guys. Let's go somewhere else." They departed with the casual arrogance of people who knew they'd won and were gracious enough not to rub it in too much. Diane approached Marcus as the teenagers left. "I've been here 12 years, she said quietly. "I've never seen anything like this. It's like he knows he can do whatever he wants." "He probably does," Marcus said. That night, he called an emergency HOA board meeting. There were 5 board members besides himself: Rebecca Sterling, obviously, David Park, a software engineer who worked from home and seemed to live in a permanent state of conflict avoidance, Janet Martinez, a retired teacher who was genuinely interested in community issues but lacked the assertiveness to follow through, Tom Brewster, who managed a bank branch and was focused primarily on keeping the board meetings brief, and Michelle Wong, a lawyer who'd only joined the board 6 months ago, and seemed to be carefully observing everything before committing to any opinions. They gathered in the community center's small conference room at 7 p.m. on a Thursday, and Marcus laid out the situation. He didn't accuse Brandon directly. He simply reported what had happened: the water balloons, the lap lane being blocked, the disruption to other residents. So what's the actual violation? Tom asked. Well, Marcus said, technically water balloons aren't on the prohibited items list. Then what are we discussing? Tom said. We can't enforce rules that don't exist. We can certainly ask residents to be more considerate of other residents, Janet said. I think that's fair, Michelle said. Kids are going to push boundaries. It's normal teenage behavior. Rebecca remained silent, which was exactly as effective as if she defended Brandon directly. Her silence was consent. Her silence was, this is normal. You're overreacting. I'd suggest we table this for now, David said, until we have more concrete violations to discuss. Maybe we just do a friendly reminder about pool etiquette in the next newsletter. They voted on it. 4-1 to table the issue, with only Janet supporting Marcus's proposal to clarify the rules. Michelle abstained. Rebecca had voted to table. Walking out of the community center, Michelle caught up with Marcus in the parking lot. I want to be honest with you, she said. Rebecca mentioned to me that you were having some trouble adjusting to the community culture. She said you seemed to be taking a very strict approach to rule enforcement. Did she frame it that way? Marcus asked. She said, Michelle continued carefully, that you were doing a good job overall, but that you might benefit from understanding that there's a difference between running a community and micromanaging it. Is that an unfair characterization? It might be, Marcus said. I'm actually just trying to make sure the rules that exist are applied consistently. The rules exist, Michelle said. You're the one who wants to expand them or tighten their interpretation. That's a different thing than enforcing existing rules. She wasn't hostile. She was being genuinely helpful, which somehow made it worse. She'd been recruited by Rebecca not as an active ally but as a thinking person who'd arrive at the reasonable position on her own. Do you think I'm overreacting? Marcus asked. I think, Michelle said carefully, that you might be solving a different problem than the one the community actually has. You're trying to enforce order. The community is more interested in harmony. Those aren't always the same thing. She drove away in a sensible sedan, and Marcus stood in the parking lot in the darkness, feeling the weight of a game he was definitely losing. The next morning, a notice appeared on the community Facebook page. It was from Rebecca, framed as a friendly reminder. Hi neighbors. Just wanted to send out a little reminder to our younger residents that while summer is the perfect time for fun and friendship, we should all remember to use our community facilities in ways that are respectful of the fact that we're sharing them with others. As someone who's served on the board for many years, I've learned that the best neighborhoods are the ones where we lead with kindness rather than rules. Let's all do our part to keep Ridgemont the wonderful place it is. 2 hearts. It was brilliant. She'd stolen his argument about consideration for other residents and reframed it as something coming from a place of community love rather than rigid rule enforcement. She'd made it clear that her 7 years on the board made her the moral authority on what Ridgemont actually stood for. She'd done it all with emojis and warmth. The comments flooded in immediately. Love this energy, Rebecca. Sandra Kim. This is what we need more of. David Schwartz. Rebecca always knows how to bring people together. Thank goodness we have her. Karen Thompson. By the afternoon, there were 53 comments, and the tone was consistently, thank goodness for Rebecca. This is what leadership actually looks like. Marcus called Sarah that night. She's pushing me out, he said. I can feel it. She's positioning herself as the real leader, the one who understands community, and I'm just the guy enforcing rules nobody wanted enforced. Yes, Sarah said. That's exactly what she's doing. So what do I do? Marcus asked. You can quit, Sarah said. That's an option. You accepted this job because Dr. Paulson said the community needed someone who cared. But maybe what the community actually needs is someone who doesn't care, who'll just rubber stamp whatever Rebecca wants and let her run things without the burden of actual authority. Or, Marcus said, because he could hear the unspoken alternative in her tone. Or, Sarah said, you decide you care more about the actual health of this community than you care about being liked. And you prepare for a very uncomfortable fight that will probably cost you friendships and make you the bad guy in everyone's narrative. But it might also protect people like that woman who wants to swim laps. It might set boundaries for teenagers who clearly have never had any real boundaries. It might establish that being nice and being effective aren't mutually exclusive, they just require consistency. Marcus thought about that. He thought about Brandon's smirk at the pool. He thought about Rebecca's perfect email. He thought about the fact that he'd already surrendered once, and it had only made her more confident that he could be managed. The rest of July became a meticulous exercise in observation and documentation. Marcus bought a small notebook and began recording dates, times, and specific violations. He included photos. He included the names of witnesses. He cited the specific bylaws being violated. He prepared, essentially, for a war that nobody else knew was actually a war. The violations were steady and escalating. July 8, Brandon and friends in lap lane during lap-only hours, 2 to 4 p.m. Loud talking. Preventing lap swimmers from using facility. July 12, Brandon and 4 friends on diving board simultaneously. Bylaws state maximum of 2 divers per board. All under age 18. Without parental supervision. July 15, Brandon's friend climbed on roof of bathhouse. Photographed from multiple angles. Safety hazard. July 19, Brandon organized pool party with approximately 20 teenagers. Loud music from portable speaker. Violation of quiet hours protocol, noise levels exceed 75 decibels after 5 p.m. Alcohol observed being consumed by multiple teenagers at poolside. Violation of community facility policies. July 22, Brandon using pool as personal training facility. Hired personal trainer observed giving swimming lessons. Personal services prohibited unless scheduled through official community channels. Brandon's mother observed encouraging behavior. Each violation was real. Each one was documented. Each one could be enforced. But Marcus did nothing, documenting instead, waiting for a moment when he'd have enough evidence that action wouldn't look personal, it would look necessary. Rebecca, meanwhile, continued her campaign of community integration. She organized a summer supper series in the community center. She created a WhatsApp group for the neighborhood women who wanted to discuss books. She spearheaded a drive to paint the playground equipment. She was everywhere, visible, active, beloved. Marcus noticed she was also watching him. Their eyes would meet at the community center. She'd give him a small, knowing smile. She was doing exactly what she intended to do and wasn't remotely concerned that he knew it. On July 25, Brandon committed what might have been his most egregious violation. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, and Marcus happened to be there. Brandon had brought a commercial-grade sound system to the pool, the kind of system that seemed designed specifically to violate noise ordinances. He'd set up what he called a DJ booth at the edge of the main pool and was playing music at volumes that made conversation impossible and certainly exceeded the 75 decibel community noise threshold. There were approximately 30 teenagers present, and the entire pool area had been essentially colonized by them. Diane, the pool manager, looked exhausted beyond measure. She'd apparently asked Brandon to turn the music down twice, and both times he'd responded with, "My mom knows it's fine." She checked with the HOA guy. Which was, of course, a lie. Rebecca had done no such thing. Marcus approached Brandon directly. "Turn it off. Now." Brandon looked shocked to hear a command in his voice. For a moment, Marcus wondered if the boy had ever actually heard one before. "My mom said," Brandon started. "I don't care what your mom said," Marcus interrupted. "The music is in violation of multiple community ordinances. Turn it off or I'll have Diane shut down the pool for the day." It was a bluff. Marcus wasn't entirely sure he had that authority, but it was spoken with enough certainty that Brandon apparently believed it. He switched off the sound system. The silence that fell was almost shocking. "This sucks," Brandon said. "You're actually going to be that guy, aren't you?" "I'm actually going to be the guy who ensures that community resources are shared fairly," Marcus said. "Yes." Brandon gathered up his equipment, and the 30 teenagers dispersed. The older couple who'd been attempting to swim returned to their laps. The nannies brought the small children back into the leisure pool. The pool returned to what it was supposed to be. That night, Rebecca called him. "I just got off the phone with Brandon," she said without preamble. "He's very upset. He said you were extremely harsh with him about the music." "The music was violating the noise ordinance," Marcus said calmly. "I asked him to stop. He did. He's 17 years old, Marcus," Rebecca said, and her voice had shifted into something harder, something without the warmth of the earlier coffee date. "He was trying to have fun with friends. And you humiliated him in front of all of them." "I enforced a rule that exists for specific reasons," Marcus said. "I didn't humiliate him. I gave him a clear direction and he complied." "You know what?" Rebecca said. "I've been trying to help you. I've been trying to integrate you into this community, to help you understand how we do things. But you clearly don't want that help. You want to be right more than you want to be part of a functioning community." "I don't think those are mutually exclusive," Marcus said. "Well, they are in my experience," Rebecca said. "And I think a lot of other people in this community would agree with me. In fact, I know they do, because I've been talking to them." "About what?" Marcus asked, though he already knew. "About whether you're really the right person for this position," Rebecca said. "About whether the job needs to go to someone who understands that leadership means being beloved, not being feared." "I'm not trying to be feared," Marcus said. "But you are," Rebecca said flatly. "You're enforcing rules like you're trying to prove something. Like you have something to prove. And it's making people uncomfortable." She hung up. Marcus sat in the silence of his new kitchen in his new house and realized that the real game had finally begun. Everything before this had been positioning and strategy. Now, Rebecca was going to move openly. Now, she was going to try to get him removed. He called Sarah. "How many violations do you have documented?" she asked. "About 15 major ones, plus dozens of smaller incidents." "Okay," Sarah said. "At the next board meeting, you're going to present all of them. Not angrily. Not defensively. Just factually. With photos and dates and witnesses. You're going to show that you've been trying to apply the rules consistently and that one teenager has been repeatedly and deliberately violating those rules. You're going to make it clear that allowing the violations to continue would constitute a failure of your responsibility as HOA president." "Rebecca will say I'm being selective about enforcement," Marcus said. "She probably will," Sarah said. "And then you'll ask her to show you evidence that you failed to enforce any other violations with the same severity. You'll ask her to cite specific examples of rules you've chosen not to enforce. And when she can't produce them, the board will have to acknowledge that you're doing your job consistently, not selectively." "What about the popularity thing?" Marcus asked. "Everyone likes her. They like her more than they like you right now," Sarah said. "But they don't trust her to actually run the community. They elected you, not her. That matters. Use that." The board meeting was scheduled for August 2nd, a Tuesday evening. Marcus spent the intervening days organizing his documentation into a presentation. He created spreadsheets. He printed photos. He prepared talking points. He was ready. Rebecca was also ready. He could feel it in the way she'd gone quiet. Her social media had gone quiet. She was gathering her forces, making her arguments behind the scenes, preparing the board to understand that Marcus was the problem. August 2nd arrived, and the conference room filled up again. This time, there was a different energy. Tom seemed tense. David was studiously avoiding eye contact. Janet looked worried. Michelle was taking notes before anything had been said. Rebecca was serene. Which was the most terrifying thing of all? Before we get to new business, Marcus said, I need to bring up something that's been escalating throughout July. There have been multiple violations of pool safety and noise ordinances, and I've documented them systematically. I'm going to walk through the data so we can discuss an appropriate response. He presented each violation. He showed the dates. He showed the photos. He quoted the specific bylaws. He was methodical and unemotional and absolutely relentless. This represents a pattern, Marcus concluded, not an isolated incident. And the pattern suggests that the violator believes he has implicit permission to disregard the rules. We need to address this clearly and directly. The board was silent. Rebecca's serene expression didn't waver. So you're asking us to punish a teenager for being a teenager, Rebecca said finally. For pushing boundaries in the way teenagers naturally do. I'm asking us to enforce the rules that protect the community, Marcus said. Rules that you, as a new resident, have suddenly decided to interpret very strictly, Rebecca said. Rules that previous HOA administrations applied with more flexibility and understanding. The rules haven't changed, Marcus said. What's changed is that someone is repeatedly violating them, and the previous administration apparently didn't document it or choose to enforce it. I'm choosing to enforce it. Because you're a control freak, Rebecca said, and there was an edge to her voice now, the first real crack in her perfect facade. Because you came to this community with something to prove, and you've decided that proving it means making life difficult for teenagers who are just trying to enjoy summer. I'm making life difficult for someone who's chosen to disregard the rules repeatedly, Marcus said. The teenager part is secondary to the repeated violation part. You know what? Michelle said quietly. I've been reading through the bylaws more carefully, and I actually think Marcus is right. These violations are clearly documented in the rules, and the pattern is pretty undeniable. We can't just ignore it because the person doing it is young. David nodded slowly. Yeah, I think Michelle's right. We have to enforce this. We can do it gently, maybe a warning first, then escalation if it continues. But we can't just pretend it didn't happen. This is ridiculous, Rebecca said. This is exactly the kind of petty authoritarianism that ruins neighborhoods. We're going to be the community that shuts down a teenager for having fun, and we're going to deserve everything we get in terms of community reputation. Or, Janet said, somewhat unexpectedly, we're going to be the community that enforces rules fairly and consistently, which is actually something people respect. I teach school for 30 years. Teenagers need boundaries. It's not mean. It's parenting. The vote was 4-1 to send a formal warning to Brandon Sterling, with Rebecca voting against. Marcus abstained from the vote to avoid the appearance of personal vendetta. The warning would be delivered by Michelle, as the board member least connected to the conflict. It would give Brandon 1 month to cease all violations. After 1 month, if violations continued, the board would consider further action, up to and including suspension of pool privileges. Rebecca gathered her things and left before the meeting concluded. Her departure felt like a declaration of war. Outside the conference room, Michelle caught up with Marcus. For what it's worth, she said, I think you handled that well. Rebecca has been operating unopposed for so long that she seems to think that opposition is essentially invalid. You standing your ground despite the social pressure is actually impressive. I don't feel impressive, Marcus said. I feel like I just started a conflict that's going to get a lot uglier. Yeah, Michelle agreed. It probably will. But sometimes that's what needs to happen. The nicest people don't always make the best leaders. Brandon received the formal warning on August 3, delivered by Michelle during a brief visit to his house. His reaction, according to the summary Michelle emailed to the board, was disappointment but acceptance. Rebecca's reaction was substantially different. She launched a campaign. It was subtle at first, Facebook posts about HOA overreach and the importance of proportional responses and teenagers making mistakes in a safe environment. They accumulated hundreds of comments, each one expressing outrage on behalf of the Sterling family. Then she created a petition. In defense of fair and flexible HOA leadership, demanded an immediate review of Marcus's first month in office and requested that the board consider whether his adversarial approach to community governance was serving the residents' best interests. By August 10, the petition had been signed by 73 residents. By August 15, it had crossed 100. Marcus read each name. Many of them he recognized from the pool or community events. People he'd waved to. People who'd seemed friendly. People who apparently believed that being nice to an authority figure was less important than protecting a teenager from consequences. His work at the architecture firm started to suffer. He couldn't focus. He kept checking Facebook, refreshing the petition, reading the comments. The comments ranged from supportive of Rebecca to openly hostile to him. "This guy comes in here and acts like he owns the place," one woman wrote. "Maybe new residents should observe for a year before taking leadership roles," another suggested. Sarah noticed when they talked on the phone. "You're losing the plot," she said bluntly. "This is exactly what Rebecca wants, for you to fall apart so she can say, 'See? This is what happens when we bring in outsiders who don't understand our community.'" "I'm trying to do the right thing," Marcus said. "I know," Sarah said. "But the right thing is sometimes invisible in the moment. You won't know for 5 years whether you made the right decision. What you know right now is that if you give in, the next Brandon Sterling will be even more confident in his ability to get away with it. And the one after that will be even worse." "How are you so sure about this?" Marcus asked. "Because I'm not married to you anymore and I can see clearly that you need to be someone who follows through," Sarah said. "That was actually why we failed. You'd commit to something and then abandon it when it got difficult. Don't do that here." The board meeting was scheduled for August 20th. The agenda didn't list any discussion of Marcus's tenure or the petition, but everyone knew what was coming. That Sunday, Marcus received a visitor. He was in his front yard, mowing the lawn, when a woman in her 60s approached, an older woman he didn't recognize. "Hi," she said. "I'm Margaret Hutchins. I live 3 blocks over, on Maple Street. I'm 83 years old, and I've lived in this community for 15 years. I wanted to thank you." Marcus turned off the mower. "For what?" he asked. "For standing up to Rebecca Sterling," Margaret said. "I don't expect most people to remember this, but about 7 years ago, I requested that the HOA enforce the pet size restrictions. Dr. Paulson agreed, the restrictions were in the bylaws. Rebecca had a dog that was twice the weight limit, and she basically threatened to sue if he enforced the rules. He backed down. The dog has been violating the rules for 7 years. "I didn't know that," Marcus said. "Most people don't," Margaret said. "Rebecca's been very good about making people forget the things she's done while remembering the things she says she's done. But I remember. And I remember that when someone finally tried to enforce rules, most people chose to attack that person rather than support them. I wanted you to know that not everyone thinks that way." She walked away before Marcus could respond, leaving him standing in his front yard with the mower in his hands, feeling something shift. On August 20th, the conference room was packed. There were at least 20 residents present, filling every chair and lining the walls. Rebecca was there, sitting in the front row, looking sympathetic and concerned. "We have some community members who wanted to speak," Tom said, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Before we officially begin the meeting. Is everyone okay with hearing from them?" No one objected. A man in his 50s stood up. "I've lived here for 12 years, he said. "And I think Marcus is doing exactly what we asked him to do. He's enforcing the rules. I don't understand why that's suddenly controversial." A woman stood up next. "My kids actually want to use the lap lane," she said. For years, they've had to deal with older kids monopolizing it. The rules exist for a reason. Person after person stood up and spoke. Not all of them defended Marcus, several defended Rebecca and the importance of flexibility. But what emerged was a picture more complex than the petition suggested, a community divided not between the popular and unpopular, but between people who valued enforcement and people who valued flexibility. When it came time for official business, David Park made a motion that the board formally reject the petition calling for Marcus's removal and instead reaffirm its support for consistent enforcement of community bylaws. Michelle seconded. The vote was 4-1, with Rebecca voting against. But then Rebecca did something unexpected. She stood up. "I'm resigning from the board," she announced. "I don't think my vision for this community aligns with where things are heading. I think you all are making a mistake, but that's your choice to make. I'm just not going to be part of it." The room went very quiet. Rebecca had been the board face for years. Her resignation was significant. "I want to say," Rebecca continued, "that I have nothing personal against Marcus. I think he's a good person doing what he believes is right. I just think he's wrong about what leadership means in a community like this. I hope you prove me wrong. But my instinct is that within 6 months, people will be requesting that he step down, and we'll be right back where we started." She picked up her purse and walked out of the meeting. In the silence that followed, Marcus felt something like victory. But it tasted strange, not quite sweet. A week after Rebecca's resignation, her daughter texted Marcus. It was a simple message: "Brandon wants to apologize. Would you be okay with that?" Marcus agreed to meet Brandon at the community pool on a Tuesday afternoon. The pool was quiet. It was mid-afternoon on a weekday, just a few older swimmers and nannies with small children. Brandon showed up in casual clothes, looking smaller somehow than he had in the water. He sat down next to Marcus on a bench overlooking the main pool. "My mom said I should apologize," Brandon started, and then he stopped. "But I think I actually want to apologize. For real." "Okay," Marcus said. "I was being a jerk," Brandon said. "I thought because my mom was on the board, I could do whatever. And I thought it was cool to break rules and have everyone be like, 'Oh, look at Brandon, he's so cool.' But that wasn't cool. It was actually just me being a jerk to people who wanted to use the pool." He looked at Marcus with genuine regret, the kind that seemed age-appropriate for a 17-year-old who'd finally understood the consequences of his actions. "I'm sorry," Brandon said. "For the water balloon thing, and the sound system thing, and all of it. You were right. The rules make sense because there are other people who live here." Marcus found himself actually moved. "Thank you for saying that," he said. "I appreciate it." "My mom thinks you ruined everything," Brandon said. "She thinks you're the reason she had to resign." "Your mom's the reason she had to resign," Marcus said. "I just wouldn't let the rules be selectively enforced." "Yeah," Brandon said. "I think I'm starting to understand that." They talked for another 20 minutes. Brandon asked about the architecture firm. Marcus asked about Brandon's lacrosse team. By the time Brandon left, they'd achieved something that neither of them expected, a cordial, if not quite friendly, understanding. That evening, Marcus received an email from Rebecca. The subject line was, "Clarification about my resignation. Marcus. I want to be clear that I didn't resign because of the board's vote on the Brandon situation. I resigned because I realized that my style of leadership and yours are fundamentally incompatible, and I didn't want to spend the next year in conflict with you. I want you to know that I don't think you're a bad person. I think you have a different philosophy about community governance, and that's okay. Different isn't better or worse, it's just different. I do think you should know that there's a natural pushback that's going to happen. When you change the culture of a community, people resist. That's normal. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means that change is hard. I'm going to step back from community involvement for a while. I think that's probably healthier for everyone. Best. Rebecca. Marcus read the email 3 times, trying to determine if it was genuine or another sophisticated manipulation. He decided it didn't matter. Either way, it was the end of the conflict. Rebecca was removing herself from the fight. The rest of August was quietly dramatic. 3 more residents approached Marcus to thank him for enforcing the rules. Tom asked him if he wanted to run for re-election to the position in the fall. Janet mentioned that she'd noticed the pool was actually much more pleasant to use, and seemed genuinely grateful. Brandon's warning period concluded without any violations. By the end of September, his pool privileges had been fully restored. In early October, Marcus was sitting at home on a Saturday morning when his phone rang. It was a woman he didn't recognize. "Hi, is this Marcus Chen?" she asked. "It is," Marcus said. "My name is Carol Thatcher," the woman said. "I live on Elm Street. I wanted to tell you that my daughter has been able to do her lap swimming every afternoon for the first time in 3 years. She's training for a swim team tryout, and she's actually able to use the lap lane now. I just wanted to thank you." Marcus thanked her and hung up the phone. He thought about Carol Thatcher's daughter. He thought about the older couple who'd abandoned their laps. He thought about Margaret Hutchins and the 7-year-old dog. He thought about everyone who'd benefited from the rules being enforced, and who'd never mentioned it because they just assumed they should suffer quietly if the community decided differently. That's when he understood something fundamental: the people who benefit from rules being enforced are usually quiet. The people who benefit from rules being ignored are usually very loud. Sarah called him that evening. "You should hear what I heard," she said. "From someone at my gym who lives in Ridgemont." "What?" Marcus asked. "That you're actually a pretty good HOA president," Sarah said. "That the rules thing was rough for a month or 2, but now people kind of appreciate the fact that there's actually someone maintaining the place consistently. That Rebecca was probably necessary at one point, but she'd also probably moved into just defending her own interests." "That's actually kind of nice to hear," Marcus said. "It should be," Sarah said. "You won. Not spectacularly. Not dramatically. But you won. You held a position and did the work, and the community eventually understood that's what leadership actually means." "I'm not sure I won," Marcus said. "Rebecca resigned. But she still influenced the community, still changed how people think about things." "She influenced things," Sarah said. "But you held the line. That matters." In December, the board held elections for the following year. Marcus was re-elected HOA president with 89% of the board vote. Michelle was elected vice president. Janet was elected treasurer. Tom was asked to step down, and a new member, a woman named Priya Desai, joined in his place. Rebecca didn't attend. No one had expected her to. On the day before Christmas Eve, Marcus received a final email from Rebecca. He almost deleted it without reading, but something made him click. "Marcus. I'm writing this because I'm leaving Ridgemont. We've decided to sell our house and move to a community in Westchester that my family is more comfortable with. I wanted to tell you that rather than just disappearing. I want you to know that I don't regret anything I did. I believed then, and I believe now, that leadership is about people. It's about making them feel valued. I think you're right that rules matter, but I also think you underestimate how much people need to feel like they belong. That said, I think I was wrong about Brandon. Wrong to give him the implicit permission to disregard rules. Wrong to think that being a good parent means letting your child do whatever he wants. You were right that he needed boundaries. I don't know if this means anything to you, but I wanted to say it. I wasn't entirely wrong, but I also wasn't right. I was just defending something I'd built, even when it had stopped serving the community. I hope you do well as president. I think you probably will. Rebecca." Marcus saved the email. He wasn't sure why. Maybe as a reminder that conflicts weren't usually as simple as they seemed. Maybe because Rebecca's honesty at the end was worth something. Maybe because he wanted to remember that even people who fought you weren't necessarily villains. The Sterling family's house sold in February to a young couple with a 3-year-old daughter. Brandon had already left for college, accepted into a lacrosse program at a school upstate. On the day they moved out, Brandon stopped by the community center and specifically thanked Marcus for teaching me that rules actually mean something. By spring, the pool area had returned to its quiet functionality. The lap swimmers could swim. The children could play. The teenagers could have fun without monopolizing the entire space. It wasn't revolutionary. It wasn't even particularly dramatic anymore. It was just a pool where the rules were enforced and everyone understood that. Marcus still served as HOA president. He still had to make difficult decisions. He still had to tell people no sometimes. But he'd learned something that Rebecca, with all her strategic brilliance, had never quite understood: people respect you more for doing your actual job consistently than they like you for making them feel special by allowing them to break the rules. In July, exactly 1 year after the water balloon incident, Marcus was at the pool with a friend from his architecture firm, a woman named Elena who'd recently moved to Ridgemont. "This place is really nice," Elena said, swimming slowly in the lap lane. "Organized. Well-maintained." "It took a while to get here," Marcus said, sitting on the deck. "What do you mean?" Elena asked. Marcus started to explain the whole saga, and as he told it, he realized how much distance he'd traveled from that first Saturday when he confronted Brandon and lost the war by winning the battle. He'd learned about community politics and human nature and the price of actually doing your job instead of just appearing to do it. But mainly, he'd learned that there were people everywhere who were quietly grateful for someone willing to enforce rules fairly and consistently. They were never going to be as vocal as the people upset about consequences, but they were also never going to stop showing up, never going to stop quietly using the pool that worked because someone had been willing to be unpopular in the moment. Elena climbed out of the pool and asked him to grab dinner sometime. He said yes. He was learning to live his life again, to do things that weren't about the job or the community or the endless navigation of other people's expectations. By August, he'd started dating Elena seriously. By November, they'd taken a trip together. By the following spring, she'd moved into his house and they'd started talking about the future. One afternoon, sitting on the porch of his new house, watching the sun set over the development where he'd fought so hard for something that nobody else even seemed to care about, Marcus thought about Brandon Sterling and Rebecca Sterling and all the ways that people tried to bend the world to their particular desires. He thought about the woman who'd thanked him for enforcing the rules about the dog. He thought about Carol Thatcher's daughter, training for the swim team in the lap lane that was finally available to her. He thought about all the small, quiet victories that nobody ever celebrated. And he realized that maybe that was the real test of whether you were doing something right, not whether everyone liked you, but whether the people who actually needed the service you provided were able to access it. The pool was quiet at sunset, rippling gently in the evening breeze. Beautiful. Fair. Open to everyone according to the rules that applied to everyone equally. It took a while to build something like that. It took being willing to be unpopular. It took consistency. It took refusing to surrender to the pressure of people who'd had things their way for so long they couldn't imagine any other arrangement. Marcus watched the sun disappear below the tree line and thought, this is what leadership actually looks like. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't particularly nice. But it was real. And somehow, in a way he couldn't quite explain to people like Rebecca Sterling, that made it enough. Marcus stood in the community center with Michelle Wong, watching a short video that the development had commissioned for new residents. It showed the facilities, the rules, the expectations. It was designed to set expectations clearly from the moment people arrived. As they watched, footage of the pool appeared on screen. The lap swimmers doing their laps. Children playing safely in the leisure pool. Teenagers having fun within the space designated for teenagers. Everyone coexisting in the same space without conflict because everyone understood the rules. You should be proud of this, Michelle said. This is what you created. I didn't create anything, Marcus said. The rules already existed. I just enforced them. Exactly, Michelle said. Which is what actual leadership means. The video ended, and the new residents clapped politely. As they filed out, Michelle's phone buzzed. She checked it and laughed. You're going to love this, she said, showing him the screen. It was a Facebook post from Rebecca Sterling, from her new community in Westchester. It read, "My HOA president here asked me if I wanted to join the board. I told him I'd retired from community governance. But I have to say, I respect the people who do it well. It's harder than people understand. #leadership matters." Marcus laughed. I think that might be the closest thing to a compliment I'm ever going to get from her. That's probably fair, Michelle said. You two speak different languages about what community actually means. Maybe, Marcus said. Or maybe we both wanted the same thing, just differently. She wanted to feel valued. I wanted things to work. They're not the same, but they're not completely incompatible either. He thought of Brandon, now in his sophomore year of college, occasionally posting photos from lacrosse games. He thought of Rebecca, settling into a new community, probably starting to volunteer and organize and do all the things that gave her life meaning. He thought of the older couple who could swim their laps, and Carol Thatcher's daughter who'd made the swim team. And he thought of the simple truth he discovered through all of it: sometimes the world needs people who are willing to be unpopular in the moment so that everyone can function fairly later. That evening, he and Elena went to the pool. The sun was setting, turning the water gold. A few lap swimmers were doing their evening workouts. A family splashed gently in the leisure pool. It was peaceful. It was fair. It worked. Elena took his hand and they watched the water together. Do you ever regret it? Elena asked. Taking the job? Sometimes, Marcus admitted. It's been harder than I expected. But no. I don't think I regret it. Even the Rebecca Sterling stuff. Especially the Rebecca Sterling stuff, Marcus said. Because she taught me that doing your actual job is worth more than being liked for your approach to it. That's a lesson I needed to learn. The sun continued its descent, and the pool continued to reflect its light, and everything continued on according to the rules that made it all possible.